Hey everybody, welcome back to Miss Chiha's Reading Corner. I know we've been doing a lot of science and we've been reading from this book, our Say What Creatures book, and I love this book. It's been so great and it tells us a lot of crazy things about animals that we might not know. But I thought we'd take a little breather and we'd read a different kind of book. So today we're going to read Curious George Gets a Medal. I actually had my dad today go through our garage and get a bunch of boxes down that had my books from when I was younger, and I love this book. This book used to be my favorite book in school. I loved it so much that I would check it out almost every single week. The librarian could never give anybody else this book because it was always in my backpack, and I loved it so much that she even let me keep it at the end of the year. That's why it still has, the little tag that usually libraries have. It still has it on there, and it is just one of my favorite books, so I thought that we would read it together. So this is Curious George Gets a Medal. I don't know if y'all have seen the movie or know who Curious George is, but he's a little monkey and he is curious. So we are going to read about him today. So this is George. He lived with his friend, the man with the yellow hat. He was a good little monkey and always very curious. George was alone this morning, looking at picture books, when the doorbell rang. Get situated. It was the mailman. "Here is a letter for you," he said. "Put it on your friend's desk. He'll read it to you when he comes home." George was curious. It was not often that somebody wrote him. Too bad he could not read the letter, but maybe he could write one himself. In the top drawer of the desk, there was paper, and ink, and a fountain pen. George sat down on the floor and began to write, but the pen was dry. Back in the olden days, there used to be a thing. It was this fountain pen and ink, and you would dip the pen into the ink, and that's how you used to write, because there was not like pens around, so that's what they mean by a fountain pen. It needed ink. George would have to fill it. He got a funnel from the kitchen and started pouring ink. But instead of going into the pen, the ink spilled all over and made a big blue puddle on the floor. It was an awful mess. Quickly, George got the blotter from the desk, but that was no help. The puddle grew bigger all the time. George had to think of something else. Why, soap and water, that's what you clean it up with. From the kitchen shelf, he got a big box of soap powder and poured all the powder over the ink. Do you guys think that's gonna help it? I don't know, let's see. Then he pulled the garden hose through the window, opened the tap, and sprayed water on the powder. Bubbles began to form, and then some lather, and more lather, and more lather, and more lather. In no time, the whole room was full of lather, so full indeed that George had to escape in a hurry. George sat down in the grass and thought for a long time. Finally, he had an idea. He would go get the big shovel and shovel the lather out of the window. But where was the lather? While George had been outside thinking, it had all turned into water. Now the room looked like a lake and the furniture like islands in it. The shovel was no use. A pump is what George needed. George should have just left the letter alone, right? He knew just where to find one. He had seen a portable pump at the farm down the road. The farmer was away working in the fields. Nobody noticed George when he got the pump out of the shed. It was heavy. He would need help to pull it all the way back to the house. Maybe he could tie the goat to the pump and make her pull it. But just as George was about to slip the loop over the goat's head, he was hurled through the air and landed near a pen full of pigs. So I don't think she really wanted to do that. The biggest pig was standing near the gate. What if George opened the gate just enough to let him out? A big pig could easily pull a small pump. Carefully, George lifted the lash, and before he knew it, all the pigs had burst out of the pen, grunting and squealing and trying to get away as fast as they could. George was delighted. He had never seen anything like it. For the moment, all his troubles were forgotten. But now the pigs were all gone and not a single one was left to help him with the pump. I don't know why George is delighted. I mean, that is beautiful, all those pigs, but I would be scared. I wouldn't know how to get them back together. Luckily, there were cows grazing nearby. Cows were gentle and strong. It would mean nothing to a cow to pull the pump for him. This time George was right. The cow did not mind being tied to the pump. She even let him climb on her back, and off they went. George was glad. Now he would soon be home, pump out of the room, and everything would be all right. Meanwhile, the farmer and his son had heard the squealing of the pigs. They rushed home from the fields and now had their hands full catching all the pigs. Not until the last pig was safely back in the pen did they have time to look around. And what did they see? A little monkey riding on their cow, making off with their pump. So I don't know if y'all can see, but right here is George, and he's on the cow, and these are the farmers. They're like, bring us back our cow, and why'd you let all our pigs out? The chase was on. George and the cow were ahead to first, but the pump was slowing them down. The farmers were getting closer and closer. Now they had almost caught up with them, but where was George? So you can see right here, there's no George on that cow anymore. Where do you think George went? Here he was, hiding in his shirt. The farmers had run past him, but on their way home, they had to come back over the same road. George did not feel safe in his hiding place. Just then, a truck came rattling down the road. George jumped aboard, monkeys are good at jumping, and was gone before the farmers had a chance to see him. The truck drove to a part of town that George had never seen before. At last it stopped in front of a large building. It was a museum. George did not know what a museum was. He was curious. While the guard was busy reading his paper, George slipped inside. Now, if you were George at this point and curiosity got you to where it had gotten him, wouldn't you have just gone home? I probably would have just gone home and not gotten the museum. He walked up the steps and into a room full of a bunch of animals. At first, George was scared, but then he noticed that they did not move. They were not alive. They were stuffed animals put into the museum so that everybody could get a good look at them. Oh. In the next room, George saw something so enormous it took his breath away. What do you think George saw in a museum that was so enormous it took his breath away? Dinosaur! George was not scared this time. He knew it was not real. He looked at the dinosaur and then at the baby dinosaur, and then he saw the palm tree full of nuts. George liked nuts. Suddenly he felt very hungry. He had missed lunch that day. He would climb up, and just then he heard footsteps. He had to hide again, but where? A family came in to take a look at the dinosaur. They paid no attention to the little monkey who was standing there. The monkey did not move. He stood so still they thought he was just another stuffed animal. George was glad when they were gone. Now he could pick the nuts. He climbed up the dinosaur's neck and started to pull, but the nuts would not come off. He pulled harder and harder, and the tree began to sway. Little does George know, the nuts aren't real, right? The animals are fake, and the props with them are fake as well, right? Crash! Down came the tree on the dinosaur's head. Down came the dinosaur, and down came George. Guards came rushing in from all sides, and underneath the fallen dinosaur, they had found a little monkey. They pulled him out of there and brought him to his Professor Wiseman, who was the director of the museum. Professor Wiseman was terribly angry. Lock that naughty monkey up right away, he said, and take him back to the zoo. He must have run away from there. Do they look happy? Not at all. Professor Wiseman is the director of the museum, and he does not look happy. George was carried off in a cage. He felt so ashamed he almost wished he were dead. Suddenly the door opened. "George!" somebody shouted. It was his friend, the man with the yellow hat. "It seems you got yourself into a lot of trouble today," he said, "but maybe this letter here will get you out of it. It's from Professor Wiseman. He needs your help for an experiment. I found it on my desk at home, but I couldn't find you anywhere, so I came over here to talk to the professor." And this is what the letter said. I'm going to read this letter. Dear George, a small spaceship has been built by our experimental station. It is too small for a man, but could carry a little monkey. Would you be willing to go up in it? I have never met you, but I hear that you are this bright little monkey who can do all sorts of things, and that is just what we need. We want you to do something nobody has ever done before. Go out of a spaceship in flight. When we flash you a signal, you will have to open the door and bail out with the help of emergency rockets. We hope that you are willing and that your friend will permit you to go. Gratefully yours, Professor Wiseman, Director of the Science Museum. So that's pretty crazy that this whole time the letter was from Professor Wiseman, and this whole journey with George has led us to Professor Wiseman. Do you think he's going to still let him do it? He's pretty mad. So you are George, Professor Wiseman said. If I had only known. Of course, everything will be forgiven if you are willing to go. They got the smallest size spacesuit for George and all the other things he needed for the flight. They then helped him put them on and showed him how to use them. When everything was ready, a truck drove up with a special television screen mounted on it to watch the flight. So they have this little car come up with this TV screen so they can watch George in flight. They all got on and were off to the launching site. They checked all the controls of the spaceship, especially the lever that opened the door. George tried it too. The greatest moment had come. George waved goodbye and went aboard. The door was closed. Professor Wiseman began to count. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go! He pressed the button and the ship rose into the air, slowly first, and then faster and faster and higher, until they could no longer see it in the sky, but they could see it on the screen. Now the moment had come for George to bail out. Professor Wiseman flashed a signal. They watched the screen, but George did not move. Why didn't he pull the lever? In a few seconds it would be too late. The ship would be lost in outer space with George in it. What do you think he's gonna do? They waited anxiously. At last, George began to move. Slowly, as if in a daze, he was groping for the lever. He would reach it in time. There, he had grabbed it. The door opened. Hurrah! George was on his way. Out of the blue, an open parachute came floating down to earth. The truck raced over to the spot where George would land. What a welcome for George. Professor Wiseman hung a big golden medal around his neck. Because, he said, you are the first living being to come back to Earth from a space flight. And on the medal it said, to George, the first space monkey. Then a newspaper man took his picture and everybody shouted and cheered. Even the farmer and his son and the kind woman from next door, who had worked for hours to get the water out of the room. So the woman next door, the neighbor of the man in the yellow hat in George's place, helped them clean the water. I'm proud of you, George, said the man with the yellow hat. I guess the whole world is proud of you today. It was the happiest day in George's life. The end. So I hope you guys like this book. I love this book. It is such a great little book, and it shows you that curiosity can sometimes lead you to places that you shouldn't be in. So you should stay in your business. But for George, it definitely led him to a place that he was going to get to eventually, which was meeting the professor. But he had to go through a lot. And I don't know if I could have probably handled it the way he did. So I hope you guys enjoyed this reading, and I'm so glad that we got to do this today. I really wish it could have been with y'all all sitting on the carpet and us reading together and laughing together, but hopefully we'll be able to do that soon. See you guys later.